Welcome to our latest YouTube slash Patreon bonus content episode that we're doing. This will go live first on our Patreon page at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. That's how you're listening to this. Thank you for your support. We really, truly do appreciate it. If you're listening to this after it goes live to the public, thank you for tuning in as well. If you want to get early access to all of our bonus content, you can sign up at Patreon for as low as $1 a month, and it all helps out the show. And again, that's patreon.com/InSessionFilm. With that out of the way, as I'm sure you are all aware by reading the title, we are talking about the first episode of the new Amazon series, Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power?
Yeah.
Is it Lord? Just we're doubling up on rings. That's how this is going to go. I am joined by a lovely friend of the show, Christian Eulenberg. Christian, welcome back, my friend. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back on. I mean, it's always a great day. Like, I feel like we are in like the height of not only just like golden age of like television this year, but like fantasy altogether. Like we have House of the Dragon. Now we have Rings of Power. His Dark Materials season 3 is coming out later this year.
Yeah,
it's a great time to be like a fantasy nerd. Like it's fantastic.
It is fantastic. I am a big fan of Lord of the Rings. I have not read the books though, so I wouldn't say that I am, let's say, Christian. I'm not Stephen Colbert level in terms. I'm not even Christian level in terms of my nerdom when it comes to Lord of the Rings. But I am a big fan of the movies. I should probably read the books. But I do love the films, at least that original trilogy. The Hobbit trilogy is another beast for another day.
Oh, I've tried reading the Lord of the Rings books, but I've never gotten very, very far.
Yeah, no, I need to do that. I need to, especially if the audiobooks exist. I assume that they exist in audiobook form.
They're very dry, depending on who's narrating. Like, I mean, it's different for like Hunger Games. Like Tatiana Maslany, she does that for Hunger Games, which I thought was cool.
That's
for
cool.
Lord of the Rings, I don't know who it is, but it is.
I'm not sure. Okay, fair. Because currently I'm in the middle of doing that with the Harry Potter books, and I don't. Good. Yeah, I don't know who's doing the narration. I get mine through audible.com, and I'm having a lot of fun with those books. So maybe I'll do the same with Lord of the Rings at some point. But that leads us to this new prequel series, again on Amazon. Go watch on Amazon Prime. I assume they want us to plug that. Let's talk about episode 1. So we're only doing episode 1 for this conversation. Christian and I will get back together for episode 2 and the others as they come. I know as we are recording this, the second one is out, so hopefully we'll get together here in the next few days to talk about that one. But we're going to be talking about episode 1. So as we get into this, obviously there is so much lore and world building to this episode among the characters it introduces, the drama that it starts to delve into. I want to start off by asking you this, Christian, because I know you know this world more than I do.
Slightly.
In terms of its lore. I guess the definition of slightly will become more vivid as we go here, because I'm really curious how or what you can bring to the table, because what I know in terms of lore or just the world building, the map, if you will, of Middle Earth, it's, what's in my mind is what we see in that original trilogy, right?
Yeah.
So in this first episode, we are given it's all new territory.
Right.
Other than the term Middle Earth, we go there. But in terms of where the setting of this first episode anyway takes place, And to my again, in terms of the timeline, this is way earlier than the events of the Lord of the Rings trilogy as well. So
Right.
I'm sure that's part of it. But the setting is also very different. So Christian, what can you tell us about Middle Earth at this time?
Very little.
Can you explain it to me?
I know this is during like the second age of Middle Earth's history.
Is it the first? I thought it was the first.
I thought, okay, so
We're already not even sure.
well, because I thought it was, well, going into this before watching it, I thought it was the second.
You might be right. I thought I had heard the first age, but I don't know.
But
Honestly, I
on
don't know.
Rotten Tomatoes, it says the second age. But then again,
Okay.
those kind of websites can be wrong sometimes because
Mhm.
IMDb has messed me up many a times on certain things. Like that is not
Sure.
correct.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Well, so I did find this. This is, again, I don't know. We can't take Wikipedia at face value all the time, but according to what is here on Wikipedia, it also says that the series is set in the second age of Middle Earth.
okay.
So I think you're right about that. I think it is the second age. So I heard wrong.
I don't know much. Like I know that when this series first came out, I was very excited. I just didn't know what to think of it because I'm like, oh my gosh, Game of Thrones is back, and then we have Lord of the Rings, which I mean, the last time we saw anything Lord of the Rings related was The Hobbit, and it's like I don't know how you split one book in 3 movies, but that is a conversation for a different day. I will say for Rings of Power, because I've only seen the first episode myself. I didn't want to get too ahead of myself.
Sure.
I think when it comes to new people getting into this, I think the expedition is kind of there. During like this is a prequel, during Galadriel's, I guess her come up, I guess, if you will. We see this inner turmoil with her character, of what happened with her brother during the war that kind of led to Sauron being the main focus. And then there's Mordith. These names are very confusing, by the way.
Yeah, they're all new characters. I'm still adjusting as well.
Literally, it's I mean, it's worse than Game of Thrones it really is. But it's the lore is so rich and everything. It's like it's so crazy. But
I will say though, the one thing that I really do appreciate about this series in terms of the lore and how convoluted it feels, and us just trying to decipher it all in any sort of way. I do love that it doesn't really like Jackson's films. It doesn't really explain any of it. It just kind of immerses you there, and you have to figure it out on your own. So this is a conversation like you and I both watched this today.
Yeah.
So we're very fresh on it. If we were to reconvene on this episode or this series, let's say in another year or 2 or 3 years, and we have more time to digest all of this, we'll probably be able to talk about the lore as if it's, second nature. But it's also fresh right now. And I'm not Stephen Colbert, so I can't, just put this off the top of my.
He's the man to talk to.
Exactly. Where is he on a Friday night when you need him?
Oh man, he's out there somewhere.
But anyway, I just wanted to note that I do like that the show rather doesn't like just regurgitate it as through characters and dialogue, like here is everything you need to know. Like I do appreciate that. I do appreciate that. I feel kind of lost, if that makes sense. I kind of like that I can figure it out as I go. Like I can just do the work and be immersed in this world. That I do appreciate. So over time, I'm sure this will become second nature to us.
Yeah, seriously, because honestly, when I first started watching Lord of the Rings, like the original like trilogy, I mean, when I was younger, I didn't really understand too much about everything that was going on. And I mean, I obviously gravitated more towards Harry Potter, even though I liked what I saw in Lord of the Rings. I wasn't able to comprehend or understand anything. But much like Wheel of Time, which is Amazon's other like high fantasy, book series that they're trying to adapt. That world also kind of just throws you into it, and it kind of just, you're forced to want to learn about the world and the lore and what's going on. I mean, even before we recorded, like I had to watch like 2 videos. I was like, I kind of understood what was going on. Like I knew certain characters, and I was like, oh yeah, like those are the hobbits, and like they're kind of going back between like these different races of characters, beings. But yeah, I had to watch like some breakdown videos. It was very hard to find like of just episode 1 because episode 1 and 2 dropped together,
and so people lump them together. Yeah.
So they're kind of just talking about both all together instead of like separating it. So I think I went to Nerd of the Rings, which is actually kind of funny, but he did like one for episode 1 specifically and one for episode 2. Okay, I'll just watch episode 1, his little breakdown.
Yeah.
He's super into the lore. Like he's read like the Silmarillion, which is kind of like this big like encyclopedia of like everything that happens like Middle Earth. Like this lore is so rich. Like there's things that I don't still understand, but he did a pretty good job of breaking down just the episodes. And there's like a few differences because Amazon doesn't own like the full Lord of the Rings property. I believe that's still
just the Lord of the Rings books, right? Or like
yeah. So there was a few things they had to kind of like dance around from like the Silmarillion, but as close as they can make it. But right now, even for like, I know some people don't care about Rotten Tomatoes, but I just like using it as a starting point. Like for audiences, they don't really see like the general audience, the average audience score is seeing like a 34%. I don't agree with that whatsoever. But coming from somebody who's
did you say 34%?
That's what it says. Well, that's
oh my gosh.
But IMDb might be a little bit different. But the average tomato meter is 84%. I'm like, okay,
gotcha. Okay,
yeah, but there's a lot of characters here, and I am kind of afraid that this isn't for new fans in a way. But then again, I don't know. What do you think about it?
No, I think you're right. I think in many ways this is going to be very convoluted regardless, but especially if this is your first foray into all of this. I don't know if that's really the route to take. My instinct based off of this first episode anyway is that the show expects that you're coming into this already aware of that original trilogy, having seen it, and can start connecting the dots of, Galadriel is the first character that we hear, much as was the case in Fellowship of the Ring. So that's an interesting parallel, right? With the voiceover narration, much of this is centered around her, as you've already noted. So it does seem as if it expects that. Then we get like Elrond. It throws out a couple of other names, I think, that that you would already be familiar with. But at the same time, if you've never seen any of that, I don't think that really changes much as if this is really your first entry into Middle Earth. But I do think that the show kind of is aware that, okay, people watching this will understand at least some of this, but because this takes place thousands of years before the events of that original trilogy, and so much of this landscape is so new that, and in so many ways it doesn't even matter, right? Like this is like Middle Earth as we knew it, with the events of that original Lord of the Rings trilogy. Like the landscape is new. Like hobbits and how we know them to be haven't really evolved to that yet.
Right.
From my understanding anyway. And, same thing with the elves and their community. And, and man, like lands such as Gondor haven't really come into what we know of them in terms of the myth and legend of Gondor and Rohan and these places, that we know to be Middle Earth. Even, the land is there, but the cultures and the community hasn't really been established yet at this time. So you have, a general world that is fascinating, that is full of all these creatures and ideas, but because it takes place, so many years prior to the events of what we know of this world, you have a blank canvas, and that's kind of exciting that you can just kind of do whatever you want. Now, obviously, there is some connective tissue, in this episode. Not only does it center around Galadriel, but there's mention of Sauron, who is, seen once early on, and then there's like his little symbol pops up a couple of more times throughout the movie. And so there is some connective tissue, but I do like that they're mostly working from a blank canvas. And even some of the things that we do know to be true about Middle Earth, it just functions differently at this time, which makes sense because that's how evolution works. So I do appreciate that in terms of the lore here. It is honestly convoluted. I admittedly cannot sit here and tell you
No, it's hard.
all of the names and where all of this is, but
I couldn't tell you. Because I watched so many like videos just of Lord of the Rings, just like the original trilogy, and it's like, oh yeah, like how it kind of connects to the Hobbit, or how Tolkien's like son made it connect to the Hobbit. But I do agree with you when it comes to like the blank canvas. It's much like House of the Dragons. Like, you don't need to watch Game of Thrones to watch House of the Dragons, but it doesn't hurt your experience. So with this, it looks breathtaking, especially
the production design is well done for sure.
Yeah. It's like, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say many of us anyway are aware that this is, the money poured into this show is, like there are big stakes for this because it's the most money Amazon has poured into anything. And
expensive TV show.
Yeah, it's very, very expensive. But the production value is certainly there on display in this first episode. And there's a lot of the imagery here is really great for sure. Really where I'm wrestling with this first episode the most, it was really in two areas, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. I'm a little at odds with, I'm wrestling with the drama surrounding Galadriel in this sense, right? Because what it establishes is that she has this brother who, went off to Middle Earth to fight Sauron and the orcs and everything we see there in those opening minutes, right? And this isn't a spoiler. We find this out literally in the first 2 minutes of the show. Is that, through that battle, he succumbs to his wounds and Sauron kills him, right? And so she takes on this quest to go out and defeat Sauron as this warrior. And so we see her in a very different light than what we see in the Lord of the Rings. And I don't have a problem with that necessarily. And from my understanding from Tolkien's writing, that there's actually a lot about Galadriel that fits that, that visually of what we see her as this badass warrior in on the first 20 minutes of this episode.
Yeah.
I don't have an issue with that. In fact, I find it quite invigorating. My issue dramatically is that when you circle it back to the connective tissue, and we just had this conversation about how there's, little of it, or, the little that is here is a little irrelevant, but I do find it relevant in this instance because in Lord of the Rings, when everything that we see with Sauron and what happens to him, Galadriel is telling us the story, but isn't anywhere near that battle and what happens to him. You know what I mean? So to me, it's like, what is the point here? Because we know at the end of this, like just from a character motivation standpoint, it's affable that, hey, your brother is killed. You want to get the
Carry
sweet,
on.
sweet old revenge.
Mm.
I get that fundamentally, but we know where this ends with her. We know that when it comes to Sauron, she's not the one that gets revenge on him.
Right.
She's not the one that gets the kill. She's not even in that battle as far as we know.
No, I don't think she is.
So what do you think is the point of introducing her character in that way? To me that seems a little, I don't know. And again, maybe that's in the books. I don't know. Or is that Amazon kind of interpreting, having an interpretation of this character and just kind of, because from my understanding anyway, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but because Amazon doesn't have the rights to this specific material, all they have are the rights to the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I think the Hobbit book.
I think so.
So a lot of what we're seeing here, they're making up. So if that's the case, if that is true, and they're writing Galadriel in this way, knowing that in another 1,000 years or however long it takes to get to the events of that original trilogy, why I don't get that. I don't get that choice. I don't get that screenwriting choice.
Yeah, I thought she said it in the episode where, she takes this journey. Like, she's clearly not the same person as she is in Lord of the Rings. The trilogy.
Maybe that'll be the point, because we're on episode 1.
Yeah.
And over the course of this series, maybe that is her arc, is to eventually say, this isn't my place. Like, revenge is,
or maybe she does end up with, like, she ends up, maybe she does end up facing Sauron. I really don't know, but I thought she had said, there was a long journey she had to take to get to where she was, because at this point in her life, all she cares about is ridding the world of evil, of anything Sauron related. And then his master, again, I'm blanking on his name. It's kind of like the Emperor, and then you have Darth Vader. Like Sauron is Vader. Like, he's cunning, he's vile, which I thought was a really nice touch. Like, we got a little bit more backstory as to what Sauron is like, instead of him just being like this ruthless, like, bad guy who you like barely see in like the actual trilogy, but his overall presence is always there. But I believe she's so fixed on carrying her brother's mantle as of this point, because she goes on this excursion with like all these other elves to like rid the world of like all these like dark elves or orcs, and they're trying to find where Sauron is. And then the other elves are like, hey, we've like completed our entire mission like ages ago.
He's nowhere to be found. Like, what are we doing?
Let's go home. And she's like, no, it's some kind of drive that she has. Like, I guess it's almost like an obsession. Like, she wants to rid this evil, and she saw what happened to her brother, especially during the very beginning of the episode. Apparently elven kids are jerks too, but
that opening scene.
The opening scene, I was like, wow, like these kids are terrible. But I think there's some kind of obsession, because even with the king of like the elves, I think he had mentioned that he wanted her to go west to like I guess like essentially the elven like promised land. I forgot the name of it.
Valinor.
Which looked very majestic. I was like, I want to walk into that light. Like, wow, that was very angelic.
And it was that was really fascinating, because they talk about it in the original quite a bit. And obviously we know that's where Frodo goes to, and his uncle, and the elves we see there at the end. But I don't think we actually see Valinor, right? They just talk about it. But we don't actually see it. Mm-mm. So it's interesting to actually see what that looks like here. and why it has this heavenly aura, and why it's, this profound
Yeah.
place to be. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird because it's kind of like she's, she knows that she's clearly doing more than what's asked of her, but there's something inside of her that's like not sitting right, where she's like,
Mhm.
I can't. Maybe it's some type of guilt between her and her brother. Maybe something happened, because we know that Sauron kills him, but we don't know like what happens exactly. So maybe it is some type of guilt that she's feeling, where eventually, she's going to get to the point where she is within the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I just don't know what really sparks that, because the conversations that she had between her and Aronold, wait, is that his name? Elrond, I think that's his name.
Yeah, Elrond. Yeah.
Like, I really enjoyed their just the conversations that they had between, like, the two big conversations they had. That's what really sunk, like, that's why I was like really invested into what was going on. Like, that's one of her really good friends, and he's saying, hey, like, you need to go west and just forget about all of this. Like, you need to be cleansed, you need to be, rid of this guilt, this pain, this fear, whatever it may be that's like eating you up inside. And she's like, no, like, there's something. She's like, I can't. She's like, I would never forgive myself of it's something she knows that's there. And it's like, if I leave, who else is going to, pick up the pieces and continue my work of, of her trying to, I think it's her trying to avenge her brother's death. That's right. I think it really comes down to, but I don't know. Like I said, I have not seen the second episode yet. I stopped myself after the first. It's been it was fantastic. Like, especially that ending shot. Like, when she, like, she's going through the light, and she's like, last second, I'm like, no, she's not gonna go. I'm like, there's no way. And it's like, that kind of just spins off into its own thing. But that's just one story.
Yeah. But to speak to speak to what you're saying though about her obsession. And again, it's episode 1, so keeping that in mind. My question is, where does that lead to? Or what is the point of it?
Yeah.
Because, and again, I'm not exactly sure on the timeline. I'd have to do some more research, trying to figure out the events that we're seeing here as far as episode 1 of this show goes, and where that leads to. And now we do know throughout this series we'll eventually get to the forging of the rings. And I assume culminating in the fight where Sauron is maybe killed. Maybe that's where all of this is going, dramatically speaking. And again, she is not a part of that. No. At least from what we are told in narration from Galadriel herself. In the opening of Fellowship, she talks about how it was man that killed Sauron. I can't remember the character's name. Isildur or something to that effect.
Yeah, Isildur, yeah.
So he's the one that gets it, and then of course he takes the ring and has to go to Mount Doom. And if I remember correctly, Elrond is with him when Isildur goes up there. And then, of course, as we know, he doesn't drop it in, and then the ring survives, and yada, yada, yada. So she's not the one that gets her revenge. So I don't know where this is going, but you're right though, in the sense that every choice she makes always circles back to that motivation. Even the relationship she has with Elrond here, and their conversations, I did find pretty gripping. Their relationship, their friendship is very much felt. And I did enjoy that dynamic, and eventually there's kind of the Arwen thing here with Galadriel, right? In the sense that, because in Lord of the Rings, Elrond convinces Arwen to go to Valinor, and then she hops on the horse and is on her way, and then she has the epiphany and turns around and leaves. And that is essentially what happens here with Galadriel, although she gets much, much closer to Valinor, where she's on the boat about to cross the threshold when she has the epiphany and, spoiler alert, I guess, makes the same choices that Arwen makes. And again, thinking about her brother, right? Because the visual we see there is she grabs his sword that she had taken from him as he laid there, as his body laid there at that resting place. So she grabs her brother's sword, hops ship, and decides my conquest isn't over.
Yeah.
That is, so her entire arc here, everything is surrounded from this motivation of trying to make up for what happened to my brother. Again, very affable. I have absolutely no problem with that on its own, but there's no connective tissue, none whatsoever. In fact, if anything, it's contradictory to what we know about Galadriel and where she falls in place in terms of Sauron.
Yeah.
So from a screenwriting perspective, as it stands right now, that makes no sense to me. But
yeah,
to be fair, it's episode 1. Who knows? Maybe it'll all make sense when it's all over.
Maybe.
But right now, I'm kind of scratching my head slightly.
I agree, because I'm trying to figure out. Okay, so is this an actual, like, is this like part of like the actual prequel, like a cinematic prequel to like lore to the actual Lord of the Rings, or is this just?
Isn't that how this has been billed and marketed? I don't know. That's also a great question because it might not.
It's different. Yeah. Like if this is a different Middle Earth, different universe that takes place in like The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, if it's separate, it makes sense. But maybe she does come across Sauron and fails, or she has an epiphany and then she goes, I really don't know. And see, there hasn't been a lot of marketing for this when it comes to like, okay, is this an actual prequel to, Peter Jackson's, sorry, I don't know why I said it that way. If this is an actual prequel to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, like,
which they probably cannot do, from a business perspective, it makes a lot of sense because Amazon did not produce those films.
No.
So I don't think they're going to do that directly. They would never overtly come out and say, yes, this is 1,000% connected to these other movies that we did not make nor do we own.
Brothers.
Yeah.
Probably not in the world to do right now, but yeah.
Yeah. So I get it, but at the same time, I don't know how smart it is to say that, nope, this isn't connected at all.
Yeah.
Like that's how you'll lose a lot of people real quick by doing that.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of people doing a lot of Lord of the Rings like rewatches.
Yeah.
Stuff. So I'm like, I mean, I guess you're just like, hey, it's headcanon.
Yeah. Well, especially because, and I'm just thinking of fan response and the discourse and whatnot. But I think about that Hobbit trilogy that came out a decade ago. And the response to that was, they did, I'm trying to recall, I think they did fairly well at the box office, but in terms of critical and fan response, it wasn't nearly as high. But we do know those were very much connected, so people's investment in those movies ultimately became, well, it is tethered to this thing that I love, so I will continue to watch. But if you were especially after that first one, if the studio came out and said, nope, this is actually a completely different Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
it's not connected to Peter Jackson's films. The second and third movie in that trilogy, nobody would have went to see them, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's the same thing with Crimes of Grindelwald. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Like, how many of us, and I'm certainly including me, maybe you as well, are we seeing the Fantastic Beasts movies because of the quality? No, we're watching them because it's connected to Harry Potter, which we love.
Oh,
that's the only reason. The only reason we're watching.
The only reason why I've suffered this long.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great comparison. So, which is to say, with this series, I think Amazon is doing themselves a disservice too if they were to ever come out and say, no, this is completely new, not connected to Peter Jackson films at all. And maybe that's true, but if it is, I like that they're being quiet about that.
Yeah, I am too. Or maybe they just have no choice, and it's like we'll just leave it.
Yeah,
viewers.
and maybe that's ultimately what it'll be. Because as we noted, they don't have full access to all of Tolkien's works. They just have, what is it, that original trilogy in The Hobbit is, again, unless I'm wrong, I might be mistaken.
It's weird because I saw that like the
that's
Lord
what I heard though.
In Hobbit, like the film rights were on sale at some point from some article that I read. I don't know how.
I might have to look that up as we're talking here, but
because it's so weird. I mean, because you have everything with Galadriel, and then it shifts over to the Hobbits, the Harfoots, and then it's very early Hobbits. Like you can definitely see, we don't want to get into any trouble. They're more hidden within this world so far, but you can definitely see those Hobbit-like qualities that we see in the Hobbit trilogy and Lord of the Rings, where they are a peaceful race where they kind of just eat, drink, and smoke weed all day. A very comforting life. But it seems that there's like A story, which is obviously Galadriel. I would probably say the B story is the Hobbits, and then the C story is like with the men.
Well,
kind of.
I have to kind of,
I don't know,
disagree. Well, I'll add this. I'll say, because I agree, Galadriel obviously is the A storyline here, but a 1B, I think, is Elrond. And his arc here obviously interweaves with Galadriel, but not exclusively, because what we see at the end is his connection to, and forgive me, I can't recall the character's name, but the elf that is, known for his magic making or his wielding. Whatever it is there.
Hold on. Is it?
But everyone that's seen the episode knows what I'm talking
Charles
about.
Edwards, the guy. Yeah.
That scene.
He's the guy who creates the rings.
Yes. So he's ultimately going to be the one who has the formula to forge these rings, which Elrond will be a part of. And then ultimately that will connect to Sauron, given what we already know about the lore of this world. So that, I think, is obviously quite significant, and the stakes around that storyline will only get heightened as it goes here. So Elrond kind of lingers there maybe in the background a little bit, but I think it's, and as the episode concludes, I think we really start to realize that he's just as important here as Galadriel.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I actually totally forgot about that storyline for a second. I was like, he is going to be working with Charles Edwards' character. He was just sitting there with a little smirk on his face, like, huh.
Yeah. Also, before we move on, I do have an answer to the development, and I can only imagine listeners out there that already know this are just shaking their heads at us, these idiots. But in 2017, a lawsuit was settled between Warner Brothers and the estate of J.R.R. Tolkien, where they were going to start offering the rights to a potential television series to several outlets, including Amazon, Netflix, and HBO, with a starting price of $200 million. So, and then obviously Amazon emerged as the front runner there. So that's how that played out. So I interpret that to mean that, this isn't necessarily Warner Brothers kind of trying to find a wedge between Tolkien and Amazon, that they were a part of this the whole time. And if that is the case, then these two worlds are absolutely connected.
Yeah.
Unequivocally.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because that actually makes more sense. But man, that's a lot of money. Like Warner Brothers, they sell like I guess rent out the TV rights. I don't really because I mean
Yeah, but Sir Christian, if I may, we're talking about Amazon. We're talking about Bezos, who has a bajillion dollars. Okay. Like $200 million is literally what he wipes his butt with every single day. So
imagine.
I know, right? So this is nothing for Amazon. They probably make that up in 2 hours.
I mean,
So
I wonder, like, okay, you're gonna put all this money and effort into making a great Lord of the Rings series, which I think it's gonna be a good series of its own. But like, what happened with the Wheel of Time? Because like I'm so confused. Like the production clearly in Lord of the Rings is showing 100% here. Like, especially any listeners out there or people watching this, if you have like an OLED TV, it's gonna look fantastic. Because I was my jaw was on the floor. I was like, wow, this looks like immaculate. It was insane. But I
in fact, it says here, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
But it says here that Bezos was personally involved with the negotiations.
Wow.
So I'm not even joking when I say that his money, his own income is at stake.
Literally. They're like, you know what? We can't make our own Game of Thrones series, so we're just gonna.
He wanted it. Bezos wanted this and was gonna put up the money. But that is to say that yes, Amazon really wanted to do this, and it does come on screen. The production value, exquisite so far in this first episode, anyway.
Yeah,
I imagine that will continue, and also one element to that we haven't mentioned yet. That makes complete sense to me is that this first episode was directed by J.A. Bayona, a director that I absolutely adore. And say what you will about his movies, but the production value of his movies are always there. I as a director, I think he does small scale very well, but even his large scale stuff, I think has been quite excellent. And, of the new Jurassic World movies, I don't think any of them have been great. But Bayona's film was, for me, the most interesting because it's the most horrific. Like it's the closest any of those movies have been to an actual horror movie. And Bayona has a background in horror. And I think the production of his Jurassic World is quite easily the best of the Jurassic World movies. A Monster Calls, just a blistering movie, exquisite. Absolutely love it. So when we're talking about the production of this or the money at play, and I do think this is a fair thing to say, right? Because we've seen studios throw gobs of money at movies that look like trash. It's such a huge part of the discourse these days when it comes to superhero movies, for example. And not just that, but Netflix blockbusters don't look great either, and they put a ton of money into those. So Amazon throwing a bunch of money to this doesn't mean a single thing, because it could still look like garbage. But Bayona does a really great job of utilizing that money visually to render something that is truly evocative. So you make a great point there. I just wanted to echo what you were saying.
No, that's fine. I just did not know that. That is a very good observation, because like you just said, when it comes to like money means nothing. Like, I mean, Marvel has gobbles of money. And in some projects, we see them do a fantastic job. You can definitely tell where things have been rushed. And that's just part of, the Marvel, like them outsourcing a lot of VFX instead of doing a lot of things in-house, which I think they're supposed to change. But regardless, that is a very good point. It is more about like the writing, the directing, because I mean, you can have all the money in the world, but like, wow, if they did not make this look like, I literally feel like I'm like in like Middle Earth, like.
Yeah, they do a really good job. I don't know what the locations were for this, if it
Mhm.
was in New Zealand or a different location, there are a few instances where you can, or at least where I could certainly sense the maybe some limitations, or that they were on a stage versus being out in the New Zealand
Yeah.
landscape, for example. But the production value is still very much there. I don't think there's really much to complain about on that front.
No, not none at all. I remember when how Twitter is, but like
Yeah.
when the first, I think it was like the first trailer ever dropped for Rings of Power came out. I was excited because I was like, I'm a big fantasy nerd. Like I don't even care if it's bad. I'm still gonna watch
Yeah.
it. I watched all
Yeah.
of Wheel of Time, and I'm still gonna watch season 2. Uh,
Yeah.
but like, yeah, when the first trailer came out for Rings of Power, I was like, oh wow, that looks like really good. I mean, granted, as much as like a YouTube compression is going to show you, but I just remember people kind of just like wailing on it. I was like, I mean, it looks good. I mean, obviously now that it's out, like it
Mhm.
looks like mind-blowingly amazing.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, look at these pretty sceneries and there's like no story. Like there is a story unfolding here. We just haven't figured out what it is yet. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the journey of watching a TV show. Like some things
Yeah.
are gonna get better, some things may
Mhm.
get worse before they get better, but it's all about that week to week conversation and just having theories and speculations of what you think could happen. But I
Yeah.
really like how they gave us at least 2 episodes to start off with to give
Yeah.
us like that main course meal.
No, I agree, and I very much look forward to getting into episode 2. I noted earlier that there were really two issues,
Yeah.
things about this first episode that I was wrestling with, and we talked at length about Galadriel,
Mm.
and that's not necessarily a criticism at this point. It's more so something that I'm keeping in the back of my mind because right now it doesn't make sense to me. But
Right.
as we noted over the course of the series, that could absolutely fix itself. And I assume they will address that at some point.
Mm.
So we will talk about that more as it goes. The other thing for me, and I don't know if this will have a remedy on rewatches, but maybe as the series goes, it gets better as well. I'm not wholly in love with these performances, or at least some of them.
Mhm.
The cast, I have no problem with. And I do want to address this because friend of the show, Richard Newby, has an incredible piece out right now at the Hollywood Reporter
Mm.
about the racist backlash that some have had with the cast here, and that is absolutely insane. I love the inclusion of the characters here, the cast, that it is different and new and more inclusive than Peter Jackson's movies. I have absolutely no issue with that. I love that about this episode. The performances individually, singular, and
Mm.
not all of them. Morfydd Clark, for example, as Galadriel, I think is very good.
Oh yeah.
But there are a few here that I don't wholly love. And the only thing that I can think of to maybe help articulate what the disconnect could be is that it feels to me as if they're as if they're thinking that instead of being in Middle Earth, they are on a stage and I am here to perform.
Shakespearean.
And so it does kind of have this Shakespearean element to it that feels manufactured to me versus, actors, and again, going back to Lord of the Rings, that might have a Shakespearean or a theatrical background, but they use that to create organic performances that feel lived in, that feel as if they are a person that lives in Middle Earth. And that creates, or helps enhance the immersion of those movies, right?
Yeah.
When you watch Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, and we all know Ian McKellen and his theatrical background, I don't feel him being Shakespearean there. I feel like he's a wizard that lives in Middle Earth.
Yeah.
And I don't always feel that way about the performances here. It feels like they are on a stage and I am performing for an audience. and it takes me out of the world a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a little distracting to me. And again, I'm not saying that, I'm being a little sarcastic here, but I'm not saying that it's bad per se. I just don't know if I love it. For me, it doesn't mesh well. Like, I think there needs to be some sort of middle ground of maybe being a little theatrical. I don't mind being theatrical. This is a fantasy movie
Yeah.
or show. But you can be a little theatrical, but still feel lived in, like bring me into that world. And I feel like some of these performances are doing the opposite, where they're taking me out and they're putting me into a theater where I'm sitting in a seat and I'm watching them perform on a stage, if that makes sense. You might feel differently. A lot of people might feel differently, but and again, it's not across the board. It's just a few performances here and there, but it's enough that I felt it.
No, I think I think you actually hit it right on the nose there. There's two specifically. The black elf played by Ismael Cordova, or Cordova, yeah. And the love interest, it's kind of like Arwen and Aragon, but it's like gender swapped in a way with Nazneen Bonati. I am butchering that so bad, but the black elf and then the lady that he's sweet on, that felt a little, I was like, I don't really know if I feel like their chemistry, like, you know, these two people clearly interested in each other. I think that came off a little bit more playwright-esque, but I believe with with Ismael's character, the black elf, I think he is a new character that was created for this show.
I think that's right.
I mean, he looks great. It's just, I don't know, something's off, but it's not like a bad performance. It's just, like you said, a bit playwrighty, like they're on.
It feels like I'm watching a stage play instead of a show that should feel immersive. Right. And that is the beauty of Lord of the Rings. I mean, you're just completely transported. Everything about it is so incredible in that way, that it's so easy to fall into those movies. And they're awfully long, right? They're like 3 hours long. And I never feel that length at all with Lord of the Rings because it is so immersive. And a big part of that is not just Jackson's direction and the cinematography and the production value, but also the performances, which are wholly committed. And you think about what they're doing, and it's kind of, I mean, we're talking about dwarves and elves and men getting together and destroying this ring and a volcano. Right. Like, it's kind of absurd when you break it down, but that is the fun of the fantasy element of it. And this show, the production value is certainly there. And some of the performances are very good in that same way. But some of them, I think, need to rein back the Shakespearean and just be in this world. Like, you don't have to try overly hard to feel like you belong on a fantasy plane.
Right.
Like, you don't have to have any sort of Shakespearean aura to you. You can talk in a Brooklyn accent. I don't care. Just feel real. Just be real. You know what I mean? Like, you can be, and I'm not connecting that, to any character. I mean, I don't care what accent you throw out there. I mean, these characters could all be speaking in Irish accents, English accents. Hell, they could have a Southern drawl. I am from the state of Texas, and I am an elf. Like, that's fine with me. Like, I just be real. Like, as long as it's real and immersive, I mean, that's all I care about. And it just feels like some of them, and I'm being playful, maybe I'm being a little rude, and I don't mean to, but some of these performances just reign the Shakespearean, I'm on a stage and it's as if they're trying to aim for Tonys instead of Emmys. You know what I mean? Or Oscars. Like,
No, yeah, it's all about believing in the world that's put before you, and like being immersive, and you don't want to be taken out of that, not even for like a second. And unfortunately, with with some franchises, I mean, I guess even with like Crimes of Grindelwald, it's like I can't really say if that really feels like not Hogwarts, but like I don't feel like I'm in the wizarding world with that. Like even though it's a wizarding world in the States, and that's totally fine, but it's like it just doesn't feel like I've been transported back to that world. But in the performances and all that stuff. But for Lord of the Ring, for this show, it is very. I think it for such a high fantasy show as this, you have to like give it your all. You should be able to put yourself in the mindset like, hey, I'm like, this isn't even the Middle Ages. This is like, Neverland kind of, like you really just need to like put yourself in that mindset. Because like you look the part, everything around you looks real. I feel like I'm in this world, but yeah, some of the performance, I think, especially from one of the Hobbits, the Hobbits in general, they're more playful in nature, but
yeah. And I'm certainly not, I'm not an actor. I don't know what kind of challenges it would be to, tread that line of being organic, but also realizing that you're in a fantastical world. So I'm not going to pretend. And for listeners out there, I apologize if I come off a little crass, in my sarcasm. I'm just trying to be a little bit playful in articulating my experience with this episode. But for me, it's the performances, for all I know. I mean, I'm sure they're committed. I just think they need to be a little less rigid and a little less stiff, and just kind of be a little bit more loose, like just be a little bit more, because I do feel like there is this element of I have to bring this presence of being this other being that I don't know what that's like, and so maybe as an actor, maybe your go-to is that Shakespearean, I'm going to heighten everything, and I'm going to be stiff and rigid, and I'm going to over enunciate everything, and it just comes off as if you're on a stage play and not talking to another human being, and in this case the other being is maybe an elf or a dwarf or whatever other creatures that fills Middle Earth. But that's kind of how this first episode was for me. And again, it's not all of the performances, but some, and enough that it was a little distracting to me at times.
I do. Yeah, because the only thing I can really compare this to right now is like House of the Dragon episode 1. And they covered, both episodes were around the same. Actually, I think House of the Dragon was like a little bit longer for the season premiere. But for some reason, both worlds are like, rich with these, this lore. But I feel like there was just a lot of moving parts in Lord of the Rings. It's not bad. It's just like you said, they kind of just throw you in, and there isn't time to explain everything. And I feel like that's what kind of shot. Like, I know people have never watched Lord of the Rings, so they're like, oh my gosh, there's just so much going on at once. And they're not wrong, because there's a lot of characters in the original Lord of the Rings, even within the Hobbit. there's just a
Yeah.
lot of moving parts, and sometimes it just takes a few viewings to go through everything. Like when I first started watching Game of Thrones and even reading Game of Thrones, like it took me a while. Like I had to reread and like rewatch like seasons and stuff to actually understand what was going on. So it's like, I mean, there is research out there if you need it. I think what would really help with Rings of Power is what something with House of the Dragon, what they did. They have like an entire like info like page of like, you know, like the Targaryen bloodline and all that stuff, and like who's what character without giving certain things away. I feel like that would help out a little bit with Rings of Power. But granted, these are two fantasy series, but Rings of Power seems to be focusing on, you know, the hobbits, the elves, and men, and the orcs as well, versus, you know, the Targaryens and just like maybe 2 or 3 houses within like one single location. One thing I did like about Lord of the Rings, or for the Ring of Power, when they were traveling between different parts of the region, they did have a map where it's like, oh, we're going to be going here next. It's like, okay, it's not just, you know, oh, we're going to cut to the next scene. They're in another part of the world. You have no freaking clue what where and what's happening. I did enjoy that, and I like how they were able to kind of incorporate the map into that. Like it's the Middle Earth, and it's like, oh,
that's a thing that Peter Jackson did as well. So that's a motif that they continue in the show, and I do love all of that as well. But as we've noted, a lot of new lore, a lot of new characters. It's going to be overwhelming. Characters that I've never heard of. And you know, if you're familiar with the books, again, if you're just another Stephen Colbert living your life in this world, you know, you'll probably know these names. But I certainly didn't. But as I noted, I kind of love that. I kind of love that it doesn't take time to explain it all. It's just going to throw it out there and let you figure it out as we go, which is why I do love websites like LOTRproject.com. So Lord of the Rings project.com. It has this incredible interactive map that explains all of these new locations and characters. And it's really great. I do urge people to go and check it out. It's been a helpful friend of mine after watching this and trying to decipher what I just saw leading into this conversation. So, and then also just real quick, I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but to circle back to the execution of the show, you know, because you were talking about House of Dragon, which I have not seen, but another comp that comes to mind for me is Star Wars. So I think about something like the prequel trilogy, and we all know Darth Vader to be this incredible character, and with what we see of Anakin in that original or in the prequel trilogy, I think it's fair to say that it was the writing more than anything else that bogged down that character. Or at least I would argue that. I know a lot of people have an issue with Hayden Christensen's performance. For me, it was less a performance thing and more so a George Lucas writing thing.
I agree.
Writing just did not give him it didn't do him any favors. And I say that because of two things. One, Hayden Christensen in other movies he's given genuinely good performances. And also with what we saw in the most recent Obi-Wan series, he was very good there.
Very good.
He was very good there. So when he's given good writing, he's more than capable. And if he was given good writing in that prequel series, I think he would have been fine. But what is he forced to say? Oh, it's the sand. It's the sand. I don't care if you're Meryl Streep. I mean, that's going to come off tacky regardless.
Yeah.
So, you know, I say that to say, circling back to Rings of Power, is that I didn't love the performances as much. Some of that could simply be the writing, and also it is the first episode, because another thing with Star Wars I think about is a character like Ahsoka Tano. Anyone that is familiar with Ahsoka in Clone Wars will know that in the first episode or in the first season of that show, she was absolutely abysmal. Absolutely a terrible character.
Hi, guy.
Very, very annoying. And then she ended up becoming one of the best characters, not just on that show, but in all of Star Wars.
Yeah.
In fact, she became so popular that she is now getting her own live action series. Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
A supporting character in an animated show is now getting her own lead TV series in live action. That is almost unprecedented.
Yeah.
That is incredible. And that, and it demonstrates that one episode or one season doesn't define a character or a performance. So, I have my issues with this first episode, but that doesn't mean that by the end of it all, like things can't reverse course or get
Right.
better.
Exactly. Yeah. And I always tell people, because I've noticed this trend with TV shows as of lately, they watch the first episode. Oh my gosh, it's so good. They watch the second episode and they're like, this is terrible. I want out. I'm like, well, but like you like the last episode. Like I feel like people need to start reserving judgment when it comes to TV shows until after, because there are going to be episodes that you don't like, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the show is bad. Like I love Stranger Things. Stranger Things is my shiz. I'm not super crazy about some of the episodes in season 2, but I still love season 2 because it introduces one of my favorite characters, Max Mayfield. But it's like, I feel like I feel like some people are so premature to judge a show before it's finished.
I think people do that with films all the time too.
That too, yeah. And it's crazy. I mean, for we're only one episode. Technically, it's 2 episodes out of Lord of the Rings, but there's going to be people who say, "Oh, well." I mean, if you don't like it, that's fine. But people are clearly invested in it. Just wait. It's probably going to get better. There's 8 episodes here. So
I will say, to play devil's advocate, because I do feel like I'm one of those people, but my life is very specific in the sense that I'm very connected to what we do with In Session Film, right? So we're heavily in the film sphere specifically,
right?
And that's always been my passion, is that versus TV. And for me, it's gotten to a point where in my life, because not only do I have In Session Film, and also, to be fair, I understand we all have our vices. We all have our side projects that we're a part of. But for me, In Session Film takes up a lot of time. Obviously, there's my son, and that takes up the most time aside from my day job.
Of course.
And then, and my wife as well. And then in the last few years, I've been trying to take care of my health. So I've been playing a lot of hockey and trying to be physically active in that regard. So I don't have a lot of time for TV, which is why I'm so far behind on Game of Thrones. I'm on like season 4 or 5. Like I'm way far behind. Stranger Things is like the only thing I feel like I've been able to keep up with, because it's something my wife is invested in and loves watching, so we can do that together.
Right.
But so many other TV shows I just don't have the time for, because whatever time I do have available, I have to use that on film, because that's the main thing that I do with In Session Film. So that's what I prioritize. Now, I say that to say, when it comes to TV and where I would play a little devil's advocate, is because I'm so limited in my time, that to invest in a TV show that has this uncertainty around, is this even going to finish? Am I going to finish?
Yeah.
Don't know. Because the thing is, with a movie, it's 2 hours of my life and then it's done. So if it's bad, if there's no resolution, whatever, it's 2 hours and then I can move on to the next one.
Mhm.
With TV, it's very different because, especially with shows like this, and this is also my thing with Game of Thrones, right? Because each episode is like an hour long. So
Literally.
two episodes is essentially a movie. And there's what, at least a dozen episodes in a season, maybe more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess depending on this. So like you're asking me to watch like 6 movies to keep up with one season, and then
Yeah.
you're talking 4 or 5 seasons or whatever it ends up being. That's a lot of time
It is a lot of
to be
time.
invested in something that you might not even finish. You know, I'm only through like season 5 of Game of Thrones. I mean, how many hours is that? That's still a lot of hours I invested in that show.
Yeah.
Just ran out of time.
Yeah, there's
You know,
about 76 episodes altogether.
or like on a more frivolous scale, I think about like the Flash TV show on the CW. Like I watched like the first 2, 3 seasons of that, and I jumped ship so quickly. And then and I think like I could have used that time to do literally anything else. Like
That is almost point. Like that is 100% valid. Like
that's my issue with, or my hesitation. I shouldn't say issue, but like my personal hesitation with TV is like, I don't know if I'm gonna finish this. And even if I do keep up with it, will the studio finish this? I don't know.
Especially now if it's on Warner Brothers,
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
You know, everything on HBO Max right now, so
Yeah.
everything's up for snags.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Every time I'm like, oh my gosh, like so and so's getting a new season. I'm like, oh, don't get too comfortable. Those tax write-offs are
I know.
amazing.
That's why I can never watch a Netflix show, right? Because you get invested in a season or two, and Netflix has no problem pulling the rug. They have no problem just pulling that plug.
Seriously, it is.
I can't.
Like
I can't invest 2 seasons into something for Netflix to go, screw you. We're done here.
See, I'm the crazy one. Like I've been watching DC's Titans for like it's trash. It is 100% trash. But I love the Teen Titans, so that's why I watch it. If it gets canceled, that's fine. But for some reason, I will always finish a TV show if I start it. For movies,
I had that gene.
For movie, like I love movies, but it's like specific movies. Like I don't know. It's I guess I'm I don't have kids or anything, so I do live a different life when it comes to that. My priorities are different, so I get in retrospect. I guess I do have more free time, so I guess
that do what we're doing. You don't have kids. Don't get married.
Hey, I do not. I love doing this. I don't know if I could ever go to like a film festival. That is so much for me. Like I would get high anxiety. But for like Rings of Power, I'm invested. Like I am. Like, there's flaws, whatever. But like I was like, okay, like I think the ending of this episode, I was like, oh my gosh, like there's a lot of mystery, what's going on, and I'm just gonna dive in and just have a good time with it. And I'm just gonna watch House of the Dragon and this and just enjoy as much fantasy TV as I can, because it's so like it's my favorite genre, but it's like we haven't had that like that thing for fantasy in so long. Like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings was really like the last like era of like major grand like fantasy like media. I wouldn't count like the Hunger Games. That's more sci-fi ish kind of, but kind of
Game of Thrones though. Does that?
Yeah, Game of Thrones as well. But I guess like obviously with Game of Thrones, but everyone's been trying to copy that formula, and clearly this is not this is not Amazon's first go around at the fantasy genre, trying to find their own Game of Thrones. Like heck, even Netflix is doing a Avatar: The Last Airbender.
I was gonna say, are they still doing that?
They are still doing it.
That would be awesome. Because I was actually thinking about that show the other day. maybe part of it was because the last time you were on, you told us you were doing a series,
Yeah.
or a thing on your podcast about it. But also randomly, this kind of popped up in my feed. But James Newton Howard's score for that film popped up on my Spotify, and I listened to the whole thing and just kind of that score is so good. That movie does not deserve that score.
No,
It
it doesn't. Oh,
It
that
is so good. And so I just kept thinking about like, man, this material needs, like it needs someone to do it justice
It does.
because it is incredible.
I hope
And-
Netflix gets it done.
Yeah. So if they are still doing that, I really hope that they do it right and really take their time with it. Because that animated show, animated or live action, that series, that TV series is one of the best I've ever seen.
Oh, it is like, and I'm not even saying this just to like hype it up. Like, Avatar: The Last Airbender is like my favorite TV show of all time. Like,
Yeah.
Game of Thrones is like number 2, but like nothing has touched Avatar like
Yeah.
since I was young. Like nothing. It is like that world, like that original. Like I guess what I'm saying is like for the fantasy, we haven't had like an original property like pop out of nowhere, like something that's completely new, completely fresh, that isn't based on like another, existing property. Because like that's when the genre of fantasy, I believe, is at its peak, when you have something new that comes out of the blue, and it's this global phenomenon. I mean, heck, even the Stranger Things, like, there's a lot of like 80s tropes and stuff like that with it, but like it's still original in and of itself, and it created this entire fandom. And I feel like we haven't had that in fantasy for a while. I mean, they tried with his Dark Materials for the Golden Compass, that movie, but we don't talk about that movie.
Yeah. I will say this, I when I'm thinking back at the 2010s, I think that's what I find so compelling about the Hunger Games. Now, that was based off of a book, obviously, but there was no iteration of that in film or TV anywhere prior to those movies coming out. And obviously it took the culture by storm, for better or worse, because it sparked a whole trend of those kind of movies. But I am a big defender of the Hunger Games. I think that series of movies is really great, and Jennifer Lawrence is fantastic in them. So I wonder, like, to your point, what could that be? What will that be in the 2020s? And it's hard, right? Because we're in a world where Marvel is dominating, and now we're getting these series that are based on previous things, whether it be Rings of Power, you get the spinoff of Game of Thrones, and hell, even the live action Avatar: The Last Airbender. I mean, there is previous media there, so it's not like fresh or new. So, like, what will be the new thing?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Huge thing. Well, like, is the business even at a point where another Hunger Games could emerge? I don't know.
I guess the closest thing to Hunger Games is like what, the Maze Runner? I think that came out.
Yeah, and Maze Runner I enjoyed.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, we're getting a new Hunger Games movie, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes.
But that's to your point, right?
Yeah,
That's an existing property. So, like, what is the new thing? Because Hunger Games come out of nowhere. Like, that did way better than they anticipated.
Oh yeah, Suzanne Collins.
Phenomenal.
They're not super long books either. They're really not, which is amazing. I don't know what's going to be the next. Like, what is like. Yeah, like what would be like the next big like this fantasy or just anything in general when it comes?
What will be the new Twilight? That's what we're getting at.
God,
just kidding.
Oh, the anatromic baby.
Anyway, getting back to the Rings of Power, we've got way off topic here. It's late as we're recording this, folks. So the Ring of Power
Great.
Episode 1, I enjoyed it. I think, on the whole, I have my questions, but I certainly didn't dislike it. I'm not like wholly in love with that first episode, but most of my reservations, I think, can be remedied as we go further.
Mhm.
So we'll see. I'm still excited. I think this has a lot of potential. And we haven't really gotten into anything truly hefty, dramatically speaking, yet.
Not yet.
A lot of this episode is them planting the seeds, obviously giving us a lot of new lore and characters. But dramatically, it's been a lot of foreshadowing. I think about that moment with the girls there. I mean, they're not hobbits. What are they called again?
Well, they are hobbits, but they call themselves Harfoots.
Yeah, we haven't evolved to what we know of Hobbit to be Hobbit. So
they get that wolf that's happening. That
but that's what I mean. So like dramatically, it's most of the scenes with those characters is pretty light and funny and playful. But there is the moment where they're out eating the berries and you get the wolf in the background, like there's something lurking. So that's mostly the drama here is kind of just planting the seeds and kind of giving us a little bit, to invest us going forward. So I think given that that's what it was doing, I think it did that well enough. Not perfect, but certainly did it well enough. And I'm eager to see where it goes.
Yeah, same. I mean, it feels like Lord of the Rings. And honestly, that's all I can ask for. Like, it really feels like Lord of the Rings. Like Lord of the Rings 1.5 kind of vibe. But I was like, yeah, this is Middle Earth. I mean, I was watching it earlier. I just even the opening, the opening line, I forgot what it was, but it was like a really good line. It was like, those two like light trees were there before, the sun and like the moon even like existed. I was like, oh wow. So this is like way back. Like this is crazy, but there's something majestic about it. I'm interested to keep watching. There's 8 episodes all together. The first 2 are out, so technically have 6 more to go. But yeah, overall, I can't seem like Lord of the Rings is back like I was with like House of the Dragon, because I was like, yeah, like Game of Thrones is back. But it might just take me a little bit more time to warm up to this universe. Not saying that I didn't like it. I mean, I did enjoy it. It's just there's just a lot of moving parts, and we just have to see how it all plays out.
I'm with you. So we've gone about 20 minutes longer than the actual episode itself. So I think we can go ahead and pause there.
No.
This was fun though. We did, to be fair, we did get sidetracked there a little bit, but I am excited to see where this goes. Thank you, Christian, for joining me. We'll be back for episode 2, hopefully here shortly. In fact, after we get off here, I'm going to try to give that one a go. We'll see how it goes.
Back on it. Let's go.
Right back on the horse. That's right.
For sure.
Give me that bow and arrow and the pointy ears. I'm ready to go.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, Christian, for joining me again. Thanks to all of our patrons who are listening to this with your early access subscriptions by signing up there on Patreon. If you're listening to this after the fact, again, it's patreon.com/InSessionFilm. You can sign up for as low as $1 a month and get early access to all of these bonus content episodes. Thank you, Christian. We'll get together here shortly.
I can.
We'll see you all next time.
Bye.